What's up everybody, my name is Nolan Govea or Professor G, and today I'm going to tell you guys about my top 4 index funds / ETFs for 2022. This type of investing is my favorite investing. The longer that you've been investing in index funds, the funner that it gets. Like seriously, last year if you had $100,000 just sitting in the market at the beginning of the year, by the end of the year you would have had $130,000. That's $30,000 of passive income. Over $2,000 a month of just free income from doing literally nothing. And I'm not going to bore you guys with the massive amount of research that's gone into index fund investing versus individual stock picking, but what I do want to remind you is that people that are full-time stock traders, full-time mutual fund managers, they literally have one job to do, and they work hard, 12 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week, to try to beat the market. And still, 95% of them can't beat the good old index fund of the S&P 500.
No shit.
When I'm researching index funds, I look for 3 things. The first thing is their holdings. What exactly is inside of the index funds? Not only what types of companies, but how much of each company. Is it 5% Apple or is it only 1% Apple? The next thing that I look for is the expense ratio. These index funds do cost a little something. It's nothing compared to what you'd be paying a financial advisor or a mutual fund manager, but these index funds or ETFs do have some type of a fee. It's just very, very little. And when I say little, I mean the one that I like the most. If you made $10,000, you'd have to pay $3. And then the third thing that I look for in an index fund or an ETF is just how it's done over the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. History doesn't necessarily let you know what it's going to do forever, but it is good to just have that knowledge. So now after I list out and explain my top 4 index funds or ETFs for you, and as soon as you invest in clicking on that like button, I'll also explain how you can sift through the noise of some of these more exciting index funds that pop up, like recently the ARK Invest Fund and also that new metaverse ETF. So here we go. Here are my top 4 index funds / ETFs for 2022, and they're not in any particular order. Number 1 on my list is definitely going to be something that tracks the S&P 500. The S&P 500 tracks the top 500 companies in the United States based off of market cap, which basically just means that if that company is very, very big, then there's going to be more weighting to it in the S&P 500. My favorite 2 that track the S&P 500 are VUU, VOO, and SPY, SPY. People usually ask me which one I go with. I personally like VUU just because the expense ratio. The expense ratio on VUU is 0.03, and the expense ratio on SPY is 0.09. If you make $10,000 on either one of these, for VUU you'd have to pay $3 in a fee, and for SPY you'd have to pay $9 in a fee. So not a huge difference. You're making a lot of money either way, but VUU's just a little better in my opinion. Next up on the list is the Invesco QQQ Trust ETF. Now this one tracks the performance of the largest non-financial companies in the NASDAQ 100 index. It's very highly technology. This one's one of my favorite because it's actually the top performing large cap fund in terms of total return over the last 15 years. This one has a little bit higher of an expense ratio of 0.2, which is still nothing compared to what mutual fund managers would make you pay, which is usually 2%, not 0.2, 2.0%. So QQQ is definitely in my investment portfolio because of the high technology that it involves and because of the high performance that it's done over the last couple of years. And as we've seen with the recent years, especially through the pandemic, everything is going even more technological. So I just think this investment in this type of an index is just very important, and I think long term we're only going to see positive gains from something like this. The next index fund on my list is actually the king of all index funds because it's literally a fund that effectively tracks the whole US stock market. And this one is called VTI. So this one is the king of diversity. It's literally got over 4,000 different companies represented in it. And so even if, say, 500 companies in the United States do terrible, there's still 3,500 other companies that are going to do awesome or good, and that's going to even it out. So if risk is a big issue for you and you just want to put something into something that's probably the safest possible, but you don't have enough money to invest individually into 4,000 different companies, this is the one for you. Now, I will say that if you're going to invest into index funds, you want to look at specifically the holdings, not only to see exactly what's in that specific index fund, but also compared to other index funds that you're already invested in. So if you look at the holdings for VUU, which is the S&P 500, and you look at the holdings for this VTI, you'll see that there's a lot of overlap. And so for people who are already invested in the S&P 500, I'd recommend investing into an index fund more similar to QQQ or the one that I'm going to talk about in a second. The last index fund or ETF on my list is going to be one that tracks international companies. And this one is called VUUS. All the companies that are in the index funds or ETFs that I talked about before are all US companies. And so at the end of the day, when you're investing into 500 different companies or 1,000 different companies, but it's all in the US, there's going to be a lot of overlap. So then really the only way to be able to diversify outside of the United States is literally to invest in companies outside the United States. When you do that, it starts to get a little risky, especially if you're going individual companies. So the index of the top companies in these emerging countries and in these established countries just outside of the United States is the best way to do that. So now I looked through a bunch of different funds that were specifically only for international companies, and this was my favorite one. This was the best one that I could find with a low expense ratio. The expense ratio on this one is 0.08. So again, if you made $10,000 off of this, you'd have to pay $8. I think I'm cool with that profit. So there is no secret, and it's very simple. But after a couple years of doing this, you might get bored of just throwing money into an index fund and watching it grow slowly. And your friends may come to you and say, there's this cool hip new one called ARK Invest, or, oh man, that metaverse is coming out soon, and there's an index fund that tracks just metaverse type companies. We should definitely invest in that. And the way they're gonna promote themselves is super flashy with all the exciting new companies like Tesla and Coinbase and Nvidia and Roblox and all of these companies that just sound like something that we should be investing into. But for all that flash, you're paying a hefty expense ratio. Both have an expense ratio of 0.75. An expense ratio of 0.75 is literally 20 times more expensive than VUU. And now if you guys take my advice that I told you from the beginning, which is to look at the holdings of these ETFs and index funds, you'll see that most of the companies are already represented in VUU, or especially VTI, such as Tesla. Even in the metaverse ETF, they have companies like Nvidia and Microsoft and Meta/Facebook. All of these are found in VUU and in these other ones that I told you about that have such a better expense ratio. So the more you invest in VUU or QQQ, you're going to actually be putting the money into those companies already without having to pay that crazy expense ratio, and you're going to be more diversified. So now I gave you my top 4. I think that you can't go wrong with these, but I'm not a financial advisor, and so I think that you should talk to one or do your own research. And remember, when you do your own research, look at the holdings, look at the expense ratio, and look at the history.